O'clock session is Brother Eddie Parrish. Eddie is the product of the Brown Trail School of Preaching, has been preaching since 1990 in several locations, all in Texas. He has a rich history in being involved in preacher training. He was the speaker on the Truth and Love television program for several years and speaks widely throughout our brotherhood on a variety of subjects. He and Mary have two sons that are grown, and when you think about Eddie, you think about a man who lives what he preaches, a man of one of the highest character I have ever known. We're so grateful for who he is as a person, but also his very capable way of bringing God's Word. We're talking about great chapters of the Bible on our particular subject, and he's going to be speaking to us on Acts chapter 17 this morning, Brother Eddie.
I said it before, and I'll say it again. I love me some Neil Pollard. I just do. Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. Glad you're here this morning. Brother Bruce said a moment ago that he wanted to lead that song because it, among other things, is encouraging, of course, to us, but being early in the morning, kind of get the blood pumping a little bit and maybe help to wake everyone up, and that's good, and I think that probably helped. I only hate it now because I generally have the opposite effect on people, and so hopefully the song will carry you through. It's no revelation to any of us that ours is an increasingly secular society. And the numbers back that up. I know Jeff mentioned a few numbers last night, some statistics about our culture and where it's headed. And I came across some studies too that back that up, that give the same indication. 10 years ago, and I believe this is according to Pew Research, 10 years ago, the percentage of Americans who claimed no religious affiliation at all was 16%. 10 years later, it's 23%. And among those who are younger adults, millennials, that number is 34%. The numbers keep rising. Like I said, the numbers are only telling us, giving us the evidence, the facts, to back up what we probably have already understood and suspected and seen just from our own personal experience. I guess from about the 1960s onward, if I can borrow the words of Hosea the prophet, Hosea chapter 8, verse 7, we have sown the wind. We're now reaping the whirlwind. So how do we engage this increasingly secular society? How do we go about talking to people about the things that we need to talk about? Jeff mentioned last night in his good introduction and overview of the weekend's studies about the things that are involved in engaging people, some of the topics about God's existence, the inspiration of the Scriptures, and such like. But how do we go about the process of getting ourselves to that point where we can engage people in conversation about those subjects and about those ideas? I believe Acts chapter 17 gives us an answer to that. And we're going to spend some time this morning looking at Acts chapter 17 and focusing on how we can engage an increasingly secular society. So I'd invite you to open your Bibles to the 17th chapter of Acts. And we're going to divide this into three sections, 3 points. And hopefully they'll be memorable and hopefully helpful to you. We're going to start by discussing or looking at Paul's perceptions. Paul had left Thessalonica and Berea and traveled to the ancient city of Athens. And let's talk for just a minute about what Paul saw when he got there. So we'll call this Paul's perceptions when he arrived in Athens. And just a couple of things. First of all, Paul's perceptions would have included him seeing a city full of beauty and history. A city full of beauty and history. Paul was entering into a place that had a population at that time of about 250,000. He would have walked in and walked along some very narrow streets in Athens. He would have looked around and seen a lot of flat-roofed houses. He would have looked up and could not have missed the focal point of the city of Athens, the Acropolis. That high place in the city that overlooked everything else. And at the top of the Acropolis, the Parthenon, the ruins of which still exist today. Paul saw it at a time when it looked a whole lot better than it does today. A beautiful thing, but dedicated to the ancient goddess Athena. And that leads to another of Paul's perceptions. He not only saw a city full of beauty and history, he also saw a city full of idols. Matter of fact, Luke says that in just so many words. In Acts 17, verse 16, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing the city full of idols. I read that practically every public building in the ancient city of Athens had some connection to one of the ancient Greek gods. And so Paul saw all of that. He saw the dedicated Parthenon, dedicated to the goddess Athena. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just the Parthenon, but there were other places in the city that had been dedicated to false deities. There were temples and theaters elsewhere in the city dedicated to Dionysius, one dedicated to the god Theseus, a temple dedicated to Zeus. Those were all over the place in Athens. And so he saw a city full of idols. But one of the things that he also would have experienced there was a street different from the other streets in Athens. In the middle of the city and going through the city and even out of Athens for 6 miles down to the nearest coastal city of Parrish was a major thoroughfare that's still there today. The interesting thing and important thing with regard to our study today about that city, about that street was from the middle of town, out of town, that street was lined with statues to various Greek gods, deities. And so when Paul entered Athens, his perceptions were, first of all, he would have just noticed the city. Beautiful city, historic city, but he also saw it as a city full of idols. And that leads us then, understanding what Paul would have seen. Let's go from Paul's perceptions to Paul's poise. Paul's poise, and what I mean by that is, we're going to look and see what Paul did when he was in Athens. And it's interesting to me that before Luke records what Paul said to those people, he records what Paul did. And this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time this morning. We'll get to what Paul said near the end of the lesson. But a lot of those points that Paul makes when he engages the philosophers on Mars Hill, a lot of those points are going to be covered in other lessons this weekend in the series about things about God and His existence and things like that. So I'm not discounting that information, but I want for us to focus more on what Paul did, because a lot of times that's the part we skip when we study Acts 17. We go straight to what Paul said, which is vitally important, no doubt. But Luke records what he did also, and how he poised, how he conducted himself. And I think in that description of what Paul did are some valuable lessons for us as we seek to engage an increasingly skeptical society. That's where Paul was. He was right in the middle of a skeptical culture as it pertains to the God of heaven. So what can we learn? I'm going to offer you these suggestions today. First of all, and really the rest of the suggestions are going to ultimately spring from this one. Suggestion number one, don't lose your edge. Don't lose your edge. Now, what do I mean by that? Verse 16 says that as Paul was going about the city full of idols, Luke says his heart was provoked within him. His heart was provoked within him. You know, if we were to visit Athens today, and I haven't, I suspect probably some of you have, we walk around that ancient city, see the ancient ruins, we look at it in a different way, no doubt, than how Paul looked at it. We look at it as history. We look at it as one of the great cities of ancient history, and it does have a lot of history. There's nothing wrong with that, but it was more than that to Paul. When he went there, he saw a lot of things that aren't around anymore. And he saw a city full of idols. And the more he encountered that, the more his heart was stirred within him. The more we live in an increasingly secular society, the more possible it is for us to just get used to it. The more possible it is for us to just get comfortable in an environment where that kind of skepticism continues to grow. The more we find ourselves having to encounter a secular worldview, the easier it is for us to encounter that and think, well, okay, there it is again. And we go on about our business. But that wasn't the case with Paul. The more he encountered it, the more his heart was stirred within him to actually engage that and do something about it. That's our danger. Losing our edge. Losing our edge where it doesn't provoke us anymore. Where it doesn't stir our hearts anymore. When was the last time that your heart was stirred within you over this? Our hearts can get stirred. We haven't lost the ability to get our emotions stirred up. And incidentally, the word provoked there in Acts 17:16 is a word that means to be stirred even to the point of anger. When was the last time our righteous indignation was stirred? Not over personal slights, but over personal slights against the God of heaven. So that's what I mean when I say don't lose your edge. Maintain the ability to have your heart stirred and provoked by an increasingly secular culture. Because when we lose that, if our hearts can't be stirred to action because of that, the existence of that kind of culture, what's going to prompt us to do anything about it? What's going to prompt us to talk to someone? What's going to prompt us to engage in conversation? We cannot allow our hearts to be dulled to the existence of increasingly secular influences.
That's right.
Don't lose your edge. Number two, understand your adversary. Understand your adversary. You look in verse 16, which we've already mentioned, but it says, Luke says that Paul's spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing the city full of idols. Make a note of that word observing. Skip down to verse number 23, where Paul will later say, while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship. That word observing in verse 16 and examining in verse 23 are from the same root in the Greek text. And it's a word that refers to close examination. Careful examination. When Paul came into Athens and started observing the city full of idols and walking around and looking around, he was giving sustained attention to what he was looking at. Ever been to a museum? Ever been to a place like that where there are different things are on display? And isn't it the case that because of your interest in those things that you'll walk over, if you'll allow me to use this, you'll walk over and look, examine, and if there's a plaque, some kind of description next to it, won't you stop and read that to see what this is about? How do you think Paul uncovered an altar with an inscription to the unknown God? He uncovered it because he was walking through their city, carefully examining, looking intently and closely at all of those things that he saw. And no doubt he walked up to a statue, an altar of some kind, perhaps on that road that went right through the middle of the city. And he looked at an altar or an idol and read its inscription. And it stirred his heart. And he walked over and there was another one and he looked at it and he read its inscription and it stirred his heart. And the more he did that, the more his heart was provoked within him. And then all of a sudden, in the process of him closely examining all of these things that were a part of their culture, he came across one that said, "To an unknown God." And that stirred him even more. But the point I want us to take from this, at this juncture, is the fact that Paul was examining all of that. He didn't just come into the city and see it and turn his eyes away from it. He examined it. He saw, he studied what they were worshiping. He studied what they were doing. He looked at the objects and examined the objects of their devotion. We need to understand where our skeptical world is coming from. We need to understand what they're thinking. We need to understand as best we can what they're saying, that we might know then how to engage that. We need to do some careful examination, some close examination of what others are talking about. Others in the skeptical and unbelieving world. We need to know where they're coming from. Because it's a different world today than it was not too many years ago. It used to be that when we would engage someone in conversation, you could assume that you were dealing with someone that had probably a level of respect for the Word of God. And you could start in a different place with them. We don't have that luxury anymore. We can't assume that anymore. It's not 1950 anymore. Paul studied, examined, and understood the objects of their devotion. I suggest perhaps we need to do the same. Number 3, engage them. Engage them in conversation. Verse 17 tells us, he was reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Paul goes into the city, sees the city full of idols, examines, looks at, studies, and then he engages in conversation. And he went to the places where that conversation was going on. He went to the synagogue first, as was his custom, his practice. But he didn't stay there. He also went into the marketplace, the agora, in Athens. And the marketplace was not just a marketplace for goods, though it was that. It was also the marketplace of ideas. This was the place where the common people gathered to not just buy things and sell things, but to buy and sell ideas and to communicate with each other about ideas. And interestingly, here was the Apostle Paul, who goes into a Jewish synagogue and reasons with people. He goes out into the common marketplace where everybody else assembled, and he reasoned with those people, and then eventually he's going to end up where all of the philosophers, the eggheads, discuss things. And Paul was comfortable in all three places. Religious setting, common people, secular setting, academic setting. We need to be able to engage in whatever of those settings we can. And in all three, all better. But he engaged them in the place where it was the marketplace of ideas. Where is that today? Well, it's in a lot of places. You can still go, especially in smaller towns, you can still go to the Dairy Queen and find people that are sitting around the table drinking coffee and talking about today's events. That's fine, that's good. But increasingly, more and more, the marketplace of ideas is in cyberspace. The internet, social media, more specifically. Are we engaging the conversation in the ways, using the means that God has put at our disposal? I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. I grant you that. Probably, yeah, that's right, amen. And some people have more of a hate-love relationship with it. But can I challenge you today to think about something that maybe we haven't thought much about? Have you thought about what a great and easy means of communication that is? And have you thought about that maybe on that day when all of us will stand before God, give an account for our lives, do you suspect that God may ask, and I'm not trying to put words in God's mouth, He can handle this however He chooses. But should we not at least consider the possibility that He may ask on that day, how did you use the means of communication that I made available to your generation? Did you think about, God may ask, how convenient it was for us to be able to reach out and communicate with people all across the globe in a matter of seconds? Did you think about that perhaps in my province I gave that to you? How did you choose to use it? I posted plenty of pictures of my dinner on Facebook. I posted plenty of pictures of other people, selfies, vacation pictures, all that. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. But what I am asking is, if that's the only thing that we use that means of communications for, are we using it ultimately to the glory of God and hopefully to the salvation of souls? The marketplace of ideas. That's where Paul went. Where are we going? And are we taking that message? And in addition to that, you might say, well, I don't know necessarily how to engage people in conversation. I get that. I understand that. But you know what else God in His providence has made possible and available to us that we can utilize? Other people's good work that's available for us, and all you have to do is put a link to it. Project Express, other good websites that have great information, especially on Christian evidences. Does it take much to just copy a link, put it on your status post? I submit to you, any one of us can do that. Paul engaged the conversation. He went to the marketplace of ideas and engaged them. Are we doing that? Let me challenge you to expand your usage of social media and use it to the glory of God. Number 4. Engaging a secular society. How can we do it? Number 4. Find common ground where possible and start where they are. find common ground where possible, and start where they are. When Paul begins his address specifically to the philosophers when he is there at Mars Hill, the Areopagus, he said, you know, as I was meandering through your fair community and observing the objects of your worship, I perceived that you're very religious. Was Paul religious? Sure. Yeah. There was common ground, at least in that broad spectrum. Paul was religious, they were religious. They held that in common. He started there. Now, when it comes to today's Christian and today's skeptic, there's no question that we are miles apart on fundamental, basic principles. But we do share some common ground. Can we use that perhaps as a launching pad for further study? Jeff mentioned last night, kind of in passing, the law of rationality. I think it was Jeff. The law of rationality, which basically simply says that one should draw only those conclusions that are warranted by the evidence. Go where the evidence takes you. I bet if you talk to any skeptic, they would agree with you on that point. We should go where the evidence takes us. And they, many times, skeptics think that Christians, theists, aren't interested in evidence. That we're just interested in mystical, nebulous feelings that don't have any connection to reason. Well, we need to help them to realize that we're not antagonistic to reason. As a matter of fact, we believe exactly what they believe with regard to go where the evidence takes you. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that everybody who has that philosophy follows it. But at least there's agreement there. Can we start there? We would agree with the skeptic that there's a whole lot of evil in this world. Can we start there? We would agree with the skeptic that the Bible presents God as being all-powerful and all-loving. Now, they don't believe that that's actually true, but they do believe that that's how the Bible presents God. Okay, we would agree with them on that. Find common ground and start where they are. Paul, even in this section, Acts 19, he even quotes from two Greek poets that were as pagan as the philosophers he was talking to. But what those poets said, he could use because they were general statements of truth. And he used them and turned them to his advantage. Might it be possible? That was hostile testimony. Might it be possible for us to find nuggets like that from someone that they admire, the skeptic, and use them to start where they are? Paul did that to create a rapport with them. Maybe we could do the same. Number 5, ignore insults. Ignore insults. They're going to happen. Ignore them. In verse number 18, Luke says, also some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers were conversing with him. Some were saying, what would this idle babbler wish to say? What does this babbler want to say? That word, babbler, literally means a seed picker. And when it was used in a literal sense, it was used to describe various species of bird that would hop around on the ground picking up seeds. But it came to be used in a pejorative fashion, figuratively. And they would apply it to people. And what they meant by it was it's someone who has hopped around and picked up a few seeds, a few grains of knowledge. Even more, it came to describe the person who was spouting off what he thought he knew, but he didn't know nearly as much as he thought he knew. I won't read it. There's a lengthy definition discussion in the manuscript on how that word came to be used. And I invite you to read that. But here's the bottom line. That word, translated idle babbler in the New American Standard, was basically, if you wanted to call somebody an ignoramus, that's the word. That's the word they used. So they're listening to Paul, and they say, all right, what does this ignoramus want to say? Do you think the Apostle Paul could have pinned their ears back early? I bet he could have. There is not even an indication in the inspired text that he even acknowledged what they said, much less addressed it. They insulted him. Paul was far from an ignoramus on two counts. Number one, just from a purely secular standpoint, he was taught at the feet of Gamaliel. Even today, one of the most highly respected rabbis in Jewish history. But secondly, and more importantly, Paul was speaking by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. He was no ignoramus. But there's no indication he ever acknowledged the insult. Ignore them. Let your speech be always with grace. Colossians 4 verse 6. Seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each one. Sometimes we can become so focused on what we want to answer each one. And as important as that is, we cannot let that deter us from recognizing also how we should answer each one. The servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all. 2 Timothy 2:20. So ignore insults. And it should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. And by all means, don't initiate them. Ignore them if they come your way. But certainly don't initiate. And when we're talking about engaging in the arena of ideas and conversation, social media, that can be hard to navigate because people, when they get behind their computer screens and their keyboards, they feel very free to type things that I doubt seriously they would say if they were talking to you face to face. Now, some of them might. But we need to bring civility into the conversations. And let's take this out of even the realm of engaging the skeptic. In our conversation with each other in the church, bring civility, gentleness, and seasoned speech into our communication with each other. Sometimes the internet creates a whole lot more heat than it does light. Let's not be the cause of that. Ignore insults. Number next. What is that? 6. Transition to differences. Transition to differences. We've looked at all the other stuff. Don't lose your edge. Study, understand where they're coming from. Start where they are, find common ground. Well, ultimately, it's going to need to get to this point. Paul did not simply stay in the arena of accentuating their common religious inclinations. He got around to the rest of it. Beginning in 24, he transitioned eventually to their differences and basically said, you know what, there's really only one God. And he is not like these idols that are dying the landscape of this fair city. He transitioned the differences. And as we engage people in conversation, we're going to need to do the same thing. And that leads us then to the third point, Paul's preaching. Paul's perceptions, comes to Athens, sees a beautiful city, but he sees it's also a city full of idols. His poise, here's how he conducted himself when he got there. Here's how he engaged them. And then ultimately to Paul's preaching. What did he say? Very quickly, summarizing, ending in 24, he presented God as creator. Verse 24, the God who made the world and all things in it. He is Lord, Master of heaven and earth. Also verse 24. He doesn't dwell in temples made with hands. You can't confine him to any physical location. Verse 25, he doesn't need anything. He's not served by us as if he needed that, as if we're somehow completing something that's lacking in his nature. God is self-existent. And he's responsible for giving to everybody life, breath, and all things. 26, again, creator, he made from one man all the nations that live on the face of the earth. He's determined their boundaries, their dwelling places. And he created all of us, verse 27, to seek him. Everyone know what your purpose in life is? There it is, Acts 17:27, to seek God. He presented God, verse 27, as being near. He's not far from any one of us. Verse 28, again, God, the giver of life, in him we live. We possess our very existence because of him. And in addition to that, he is our Father. He quotes from one of their poets. We are his offspring. Paul says that statement is true when it's applied to God heaven. We are his offspring. That means he is our what? Our Father. And since we are his children, since he's our Father and we're his children, then we ought to conclude from that this God, who is our Father, is not like, verse 29, gold, silver, stone, or these things that you've created with your own hands. And then finally he says God is going to be our judge. He's going to be our judge. Quick point before we conclude. Now, that's what Paul said. But I find it interesting that Luke didn't record that Paul elaborated a whole lot on all those points. Now, he may well have, hear me well, he may well have, and Luke just didn't record on that. But it's almost as if Luke records Paul's statement there in a way that indicates that he was trying to sift perhaps his listeners into those that were interested in knowing more and those that were obstinate and didn't want to know anymore. Jesus often did that, didn't he, with his parables? I suspect maybe Paul was trying to do that here. I heard someone describe it as putting a pebble in somebody's shoe. You get a little rock in your shoe and start walking, you're not going to walk very far, are you, until you do something about that. Always putting a pebble in their sandals. Give them something to think about. And those that were interested followed up. And lo and behold, verses 32 to 34, they did that. When some heard the resurrection of the dead, they sneered, they mocked. The obstinate, they didn't want anything to do with it. But others said, you know what, we'd like to know more about that. Paul talked more, and some believed. Verses 32 to 34. Maybe that's what we need to do. Look for opportunities to engage. And perhaps engage in a way that puts a pebble in somebody's shoe. That then leads them to say, you know what, I'd like to know more. And go from there. As I mentioned before, a lot of our conversations these days don't begin with somebody saying, what would God have me to do? It's more like Exodus 5:2. Who is the Lord? And I shall obey his voice. And yet, even in as secular a culture as ancient Athens was, there were honest hearts there. In the midst of all of those idols, lining every street, temples all over the place to false deities, so much of that was just wrapped up in the daily culture of Athens. There were honest hearts there that were open to the truth. And Paul got the attention of some of them. I suggest there's still some honest hearts today in our increasingly secular culture. May God be gracious enough to us to open our eyes to them, to lead us to them, that they might come to know Jesus and be ready for that last day that Paul told us about in Acts 17:30 and 31. Thank you for your kind attention this morning.